I thank you so much, Tony, and to Calder as well for making this work online. I am ecstatic to be back in this space with everyone again today. You can probably tell I'm really hyped. I've learned my lesson from yesterday as well, and I have removed the drinking bottles from my guinea pig cage, which is right there, so we don't have to all endure a sponsored lickathon while I talk to you today. I'm not standing on a stage, no, I'm standing in a very wide-legged stance in my kitchen, so I'm at the right height for the screen. It's excellent health and safety. It's certainly very good yoga. But I'm here today to talk about doctoral supervision, and in particular the idea of what's hidden or what's not explicit about doctoral supervision. Tony alluded to the fact that I run a blog all about supervision. It's a community blog. We have lots of different people who've published in the area, sharing their work and blogging about their work, and that's the link there, supervising PhDs. You can find me on Twitter. I can see on my phone here that some people are finding me on Twitter. It's absolutely fine if you want to screenshot anything from any of the slides today and share it or anything like that. Please do, by all means. You're very welcome to. Try and catch me in a pose, you know, if you're going to share a picture of me, that's fine. And if you want to trash me, just don't at me. That would be absolutely great. Okay. So given supervision of PhDs is a hot topic, and one that certainly today we're talking all about PhD supervision and what it's about, but it's been talked about lots because we talk about it in relation to what's going on for PGRs at the minute. And I think it's fair to say there's been a real transformation of how we're talking about the PhD experience at the minute in terms of culture, in terms of mental health, and in terms of that sort of psychosocial support. And the supervisor is the person who has the finger pointed at them a lot of the time around the ills of PhD, what's going on for PhD careers, why don't they know what their options are, why is their mental health so poor, supervisors, what are you doing? There's a lot to take in there. At the same time, it's something that's still a really mysterious art, craft, science, and one that we label as essential to all postgrad success. You know, we use terms like it can make or break the PhD. That sort of early paper is cited a lot. Something that's really a key part of the postgrad experience, but also one that we're still really reluctant to mandate training for, or to allocate enough time for, or to really treat as seriously as we have other areas of academic development and professional development in academia. So just one thing to think about, and I guess a tension, a debate, but something that we're kind of stuck with in a way, depending on how our university's governance has been set up and how supervision has been established as an area of learning, is supervision part of research and development, is something that sits within the development of a set of skills that enhances research as much as the researcher? Is it part of somebody's, research time and research allocation, or is it part of academic development? Is it something bigger? Is it more of a facet or a lens on higher education, teaching and learning? How are we looking at what supervision is, and therefore how we develop supervisors and develop supervision? And I would say that we kind of moved the field along a bit, and we started saying, it's not just about supervising someone to do their PhD. It is a type of teaching. It does have its own pedagogies. We've got to think about it. And we started saying supervision is a form of teaching. And today I want to look at the idea that it's not a form of teaching, not one form of teaching. It's actually a very complex tapestry of roles, of skills, of discipline-led behaviors, attitudes, and practices. And I want to look at this through the idea of an ecology of practice. And if you know Ron Barnett's work, The Ecological University, what he talks about is that learning at all levels and for all of us in universities has been embedded within a wide range of disciplinary, institutional, societal, political, and even existential contexts. So it's something that's very, very personal to the individual, but also very disciplined, very context driven. So this idea of an ecology of practice really maps to what Lynn McAlpine and Cheryl Amundsen talked about when they talked about nested context, and they were talking about this in a PhD learning sense. But actually, I think we can extend this, and lots of the ways we talk about the learning that comes out of the PhD and that rounded experience of development we need to extend that. You know, we extended it into postdocs. We need to extend that beyond and talk about the development of supervisors as something nested within all these different contexts and across different modes and different ways of learning. So we're thinking about ecologies, we're thinking about nested context, just to kind of broaden what I hope you will take from today when you get to all the other absolutely amazing program of presentations that come. And if we look at the different kinds of lens, if you look at the literature on supervision, and there's loads, I'm really pleased to say, supervision and supervisor identity, there's lots of different ways and different frameworks that people apply to trying to understand what goes on within supervision. And I wouldn't say this is a timeline exactly, but sort of the early stages was looking at what skills do supervisors need, what's in their toolkit, what do they need to be able to do. And we moved on from that and we started talking about styles of supervision, and you know, Anne Lee's work on that is still something that lots and lots of us use today and has been really important, looking at the different styles of different contexts and the different kind of managerial almost or leadership approaches that we might put on when we're thinking about supervision. There's lots on sort of the different activities that supervisors need to be able to do. And I know that things like national training programs available through Open University, EpiGym, things like that, they are very activities focused. You know, they take a stance that say things like, when you're supporting writing, when you're supporting recruitment, when you're supporting induction. And then we look at the situational side of supervision. You know, who is this researcher? What situation are they in? What needs do they have? And how are we responding to them with that? I think probably the things I enjoy reading most actually is the reflexive side of supervision. I used to be a student and now I'm a supervisor. What does that mean to me? And there's a couple of really decent ethnographies on becoming a supervisor that I've really enjoyed. And then the relation. This is where my work has sat. The work on trust that Tony was talking about before, that how people relate to each other and how relationships are built between student and supervisors. And we can apply different disciplinary contexts to that and different political contexts. A really nice work by Anna Fox out recently, which takes a feminist lens on the political side of supervising, women supervising other women into the discipline. Lots coming through now, certainly on the psychosocial side of things, support for mental health, preventing burnout, understanding things through that psychosocial lens. And then work as well from people like Alistair McCulloch on the developmental side, training programs for supervisors, whether they're effective or not. And I haven't included all these references because someone else has done it for us. The best reading list ever sitting on the UKCGE website. So hat tip to Stan Taylor for compiling this. It's all you'll ever need. And I've linked to it on the at the end. But if anybody's got the link handy, please do stick it in the chat for people to find. And given there's all this to be read, I'm wondering if anybody actually after this might have a think and want to join me for maybe a quarterly supervision journal club where we read something and we just unpick and discuss it. So that's my email address. If you want to hurl an email at me and say you'd be interested, I'll try and scoop us all up together after this and we can have a little think about that. But what I'm really wanting to talk about today is what's not in the literature yet. And I guess this is my wish list. My project list, this is where I would go. You know, if somebody wants to give me a research institute and some funding, this is what we do. And we will look what happens behind closed doors, what's actually happening in those meetings and do some more documentation of that. And there is work on this, you know, I'm not saying this has never been looked at, but I think we need to be able to see what's going on. It's very hidden. It tends to happen one-to-one and it tends to happen in an office with the door closed. Supervising in a pandemic. I've just seen a couple of calls for papers on supervising remotely, supervising on Zoom and what that means, how it's different. And there's a couple of blogs as well that I've posted on supervising PhDs and on the hidden curriculum blog as well. There's a couple of posts from Gina Whisker, really interesting posts on supervising remotely. Supervisor as a role model is something I'm really interested in. I didn't know what the opposite of role model was, so I've used role monster. I don't know if that's right. I really like some monsters, you know, they're all a bit misunderstood. Maybe that is right, you know, maybe that's the thing. Because what supervisors do and say is supplemented by what we observe them do and say to us, to other people, how they operate, the kinds of relationships they build, how they speak to people. You know, I learned a lot from watching my supervisor interact with other people. And we decide, you know, do I like that? Do I not like that? So really that looking at supervision through the student gaze, I think would be really interesting to do, what's not explicit there. Supervision as a workload. I know Martin's here today. Martin Goff has written something recently on the Hidden Curriculum blog, is looking at the hidden side of supervision and the benefits to that, but also the trade-offs of supervision as a workload practice. What we don't know, what would be interesting to know, is the career benefits of good supervising. Why are we doing it? Why are we doing it well? Is it just benevolence, or are there longitudinal career benefits? I can imagine there are, if you've got a huge network of people who've had a good experience, in your care, and then want to collaborate with you and work with you. Do the people who have good supervisors, are they more likely to stay in academia? I think we are seeing that now. Where do they go, and how does that support research as a whole? How does it support research for the economy, for the knowledge economy? One thing I started looking at in a collaboration with Delhi Elliot and Rob Daly and Chris Blackmore was looking at supervisors who support stressed students and what happens to them. And the spoiler is that they get stressed from it. So there's a toll to supporting mental health. And whilst we're calling for more support for students and more interest in their mental health, there is a toll on supervisors that we'll see. And I think we've got to think about that. And then something I've been a long champion of, the unrecognised supervision that postdocs do every day, day to day, that they don't really get rewarded or recognised for. Postdocs are excellent supervisors and really contribute. And a question for you, and please feel free to get on and get discussing this in the chat, don't wait for me to finish, is throw your ideas into the chat for what else should be researched, what else don't we know that would be good to know. That I've got this sense that this all comes from my interest, but there will be hundreds more things that we should be talking about. And I'd like one outcome from this conference to be that we all get ideas for what we might be able to go and start researching and looking at afterwards. And so much of the supervisory practice is hidden from those trying to learn it. And at the same time, supervisors are attempting to develop novice researchers in concepts that are also hidden. They're unclear or ill-defined or ambiguous. And some of those things are things like, what it means to do good writing, how writing is approached. And there's a body of literature on supporting doctoral writing. What does it mean to be critical or have a critical voice? What does it mean to be working at the doctoral level? What does it mean to make an original contribution or to be an independent researcher? That last one I'm particularly interested in, and it's where our team who wrote about the hidden curriculum of the doctorates, that's Delhi Elliot, Soren Bengtsen, Sophie Kobayashi and myself, our next investigation is going to dig into this idea of becoming independent and whether that's something, whether and how that's interpreted across disciplines and by individuals. What does that really mean? But the book that I'm referring to here is on the hidden curriculum of doctoral education. And we wrote this in the beginning, that doctoral education comprises official and unofficial mechanisms of learning that take place within and out with academia in an ecology of learning. So learning via the hidden curriculum is achieved via varied sites of learning, which offer support for academic, personal, social, and psychological needs. There is a range of hidden curriculum agents who are able to support, empower, and enable doctoral researchers in harnessing a tailored hidden curriculum based on their personal needs and professional aspirations. It's a very aspirational kind of quote, isn't it? And we know that not everybody's having this experience. We went high when we wrote this. We understand that people will access this in different ways, different players, different ways of supporting each other. But the supervisor is one of those key, probably the first and foremost agent of the hidden curriculum. So there's things that they're trying to enable their researchers to learn. There's things their researchers will learn from observing them. And then there's other ways that they can support people to access different communities, different spaces, to get into and access their discipline, as that guardian of as a discipline. And again, please hurl into the chat any other elusive concepts you can think of, things we talk about regularly, things we write in policies. And I started with this work on being independent with just looking at codes of practice for PDRs and looking at the mentions of independence and independent researcher. And I could take a sabbatical and read all these. They're very interesting indeed. But it's the hidden moments, the insecurities and those uncertainties that actually frame the building of great relationships with supervisors. So if we look at trust, as something that grows between two people in response to an initiating event which is framed around an uncertainty or an unknown. So all of these unknowns are great fuel for building good relationships. But there's a tension between initiating the building of trust and, you know, the providing the opportunity for trust to fail at the same time. And I went back to my paper for the Leadership Foundation, as it was then, Advance HE, and I was horrified to see that I'd written this statement in the conclusion, because now looking at it with the lens of uncertainty, it's full of nonsense. You know, I've used independent researcher and I've used doctoral level in there. So, you know, it's funny how we move on. But I think the basic premise of this still stands, that the tension between proving oneself as an independent researcher and admitting to having knowledge or understanding gaps is a trade-off. We are responsible as learners for making those first gestures of trust building by saying, you know, there's something I don't know here. Please, can you help me? And we put that invitation out there. We're also under pressure not to look like we don't know things too often. And given that's now a hanging moment, you know, we've initiated an opportunity for trust to be built. It's in the response of the supervisor, whether that trust is built in that moment or whether it's broken. And whether it's broken, what we create is more hiding, more hidden, more uncertainty. And we'll see this, and you'll recognize this, I'm sure. Students who become reluctant to attend, reluctant to give you writing, to show work, reluctant to speak out in meetings or say at seminars, and people who just stop responding to email. And probably the biggest part of supervisor development I've done over the years is when I get an email saying, "Kay, can you help me? My students stop responding to email. I don't know why." And just to look at this hiding and hidden behavior and how uncertainty has led them to this point as well. And what I'm trying to say in this is not to go on about the student experience too much, but to say that this is also happening to supervisors. And if we look here at some of the kinds of experiences students are having, this is taken from the trust work, you know, where the skills are absent in supervisors to respond appropriately and to build that trust, the uncertainty persists, and it can persist through the whole PhD. So people might say, I spent ages not really sure what was meant to be happening, not sure what be more independent meant. And I should have said things sooner, but I was too embarrassed, too ashamed. You know, it's fine, move on. I've never had a very good, and I put in so much effort trying to get one. How am I doing? The presentation, they were laughing, the profs, and like really sniggering about it. And then the questions were intended to, well, certainly not to give her confidence to present again. His little communication skill to articulate what he means. He won't allow asking questions from me to help me understand. He says there's no such thing as feedback. It's called criticism. He also says there must be up more academic and work till 2 a.m. and up again at 5 a.m. like good academics do. And I want to look at the other side of that, because these are experiences that we might recognize and might find to be fairly typical or fairly unusual, depending on where you work and the disciplines you support. But I just want to look what the supervisor says. You know, it's impossible to know when some students start their PhD what they're going to be like: capabilities, experience, aptitude, work ethic. All you have is a CV if you're lucky. Saying their degree grades, what lab project they did. It's a gamble. You can end up dragging them through when you've got no choice. You can end up being labelled as good or bad supervisor based on your early students, when you're still finding out how to do the job and what to do with this person you're responsible for. What you need more than an hour of being told off by a smug consultant is a person to phone up and go, "Oh, help please, this has happened, what's the best thing to do?" And new staff are trying to hold it together and prove their worth, often reach out for help way too late, because there's a very individualistic mentality and no one wants to admit they're struggling. It's exactly the same experience. It's exactly the same range of learning. You know, it's exactly the same need for multiple modes of learning and support for supervisors, as you'll well recognize. Lots of you are talking about that later today. So I'm here really to say, how can we, as people with a concern, with an interest, perhaps developers of supervisors, how can we be the agents of the hidden curriculum who enable and empower supervisors to access varied sites of learning that support their academic, personal, social, psychological needs with regard to supervision? And really, I'd like to just end with this starter point, really, talking point on hidden curriculum of supervisory development. These are some things I think might start to fulfill those needs. You will be able to add to this, and we can start to flesh this out as we go through all the different presentations today, you know. But for me, this is what it looks like. And given I'm describing ecology, kind of a mistake to present it in a straight line, but you know, style over substance is always Guccione. Collaborative delivered learning. This idea of tying what is research and development with what is academic development, collaborate on things, unite with academic developers, unite with your grad schools, and build something that collaborates and really situates supervision within a pedagogical framing as well as within a needs-based framing. Building communities of supervisors is really difficult. You know, we're all at home now. It's harder to bring people together, but it can certainly be done. Peers and near peers are really, really important agents of the hidden curriculum. And I think for supervisors, and especially that last quote, you know, reaching out for help way too late, that individualistic culture, there's something we can do here. Some work I've done, if anyone's interested in talking about this another time, is looking at the role of PGR tutor, PGR convener, head of doctoral studies, whatever, the department contact who supports PGR matters. They're often just in a responsive role, but these roles can really shape good cultures of supervision and good supervisory practice. Reward and recognition, the time to supervise, perhaps linked to promotion. That's such a difficult one. I know it's something we all absolutely dream of. UKCGE and their recognition framework, absolutely, you know, well worth a look. If you've not seen that, or if you've not engaged with it yet, go and take a look at it. And just the celebration of good practice, actually getting it out from behind closed doors, making it visible, making good, impactful supervision something that people can see, understand, and take on board for themselves. I think we also need to distinguish between lack of skill and purposeful bullying. One of those quotes, you know, the profs were laughing. That's workplace bullying. That's not just poor supervision. And we need to discern between those two things. We can't train a poor culture out of something. We have to think a lot deeper about the cultures of supervision and how we deal with cases that actually stray into bullying, harassment procedures and processes. And I know we're all keen for this to be data-driven, exit data from PGRs and postdocs. We want this, we demand this. You know, we've got survey data, things like PRES, CEDARS as now, and we need more systematic, clear channels of looking at these metadata. And again, back to PGR tutors, I think they hold a lot of umbrella data, metadata on what's going on for that. And it all needs to feed back into the communities, it needs to feed back into delivered learning. So that's my sort of basic starter roadmap. And to ask you really, what would you add to this? Let's have a discussion. That's where I'm going to leave it today. Thank you. Questions welcome.